You look well.
I had 5 years to think.
The prison gates slid open. Josephine Powers stepped out with one small bag and 5 years taken from her life. Sunlight hit her face. Across the parking lot, a black luxury car waited. Dorian Halcrest stood beside it in a tailored suit, polished and composed. He did not look like a man who almost lost everything. Beside him stood a woman Josephine had never met, elegant, poised, confident. Close to him, too close. Dorian walked forward first. "You look well," he said. Josephine held his gaze. "I had 5 years to think." He gestured toward the woman. "This is Celeste. She helped guide the company through the crisis." The crisis. Josephine understood immediately. While she counted prison days, he rebuilt his image. While she carried the conviction, he found a new partner. Celeste offered a polite smile. Her hand rested lightly on Dorian's arm. Comfortable, familiar, permanent. Dorian opened the car door. "I've arranged a place for you," he said smoothly. "Everything is taken care of." Josephine looked at the car, then at him. 5 years ago, she took the blame for his crime. Today, he introduced his lover. And in that single moment she realized something powerful. She had protected a man who never intended to protect her. Pause the scene right there. A woman walks out of prison after 5 years. The man she protected is waiting, not with an apology, not with remorse, but with another woman at his side. She gave him 5 years of her life. He gave her a replacement. Let me ask you something. Have you ever defended someone who would never defend you? Have you ever called it loyalty when it was slowly costing you your identity? Josephine signed her freedom away to protect his empire. She stood in court and said, "I acted alone." She carried the sentence. He carried the sympathy. And now? He stands free, wealth intact, reputation restored. So here's the real question. What happens when the person you saved builds a new life on your silence? Stay with me. Because Josephine did not cry. She did not argue. She did not beg. What she chose instead would shake his world in ways prison never could. And if you believe loyalty should never mean destroying yourself, take a second to subscribe. Because this story is not about revenge. It's about truth. And truth does not stay buried forever. 5 years earlier, Josephine Powers was not walking out of prison. She was walking into boardrooms. Sharp, precise, respected. She built financial models investors trusted. She caught risks others missed. She believed in structure, discipline, partnership. That was how she met Dorian Halcrest, a biotech founder with vision and charm. He spoke about innovation. She spoke about sustainability. He loved growth. She protected stability. They became known as a force. He stood in front of cameras. She stood behind the numbers. When Halcrest Biotech expanded, headlines praised his leadership. Inside the company, executives knew something else. Josephine was the safeguard, the one who made sure ambition did not become recklessness. At least, that was the belief. In the early years, he told her often, "We win together." And she believed him. She believed love meant standing beside your partner when pressure rose. She believed unity meant shielding each other from harm. What she did not realize was this. He valued reputation more than relationship. And when pressure came, he would protect the empire first, even if it meant sacrificing the woman who built it with him. The federal audit did not come quietly. It landed without warning. Regulators flagged offshore transfers tied to executive authorization, large amounts, aggressive timing, risk layered over risk. Josephine reviewed the documents twice. The signatures traced back to Dorian's office. That night, she found him alone in his study. For the first time, he did not look confident. He looked afraid, not of prison, of disgrace. "If this sticks," he said, voice tight, "the stock collapses. Investors pull out. Hundreds lose their jobs." She stood still. "I questioned those transfers," she reminded him. "I know," he replied quickly. "And that's why this can work." Work. He explained it calmly, strategically. Her name was already linked to internal approvals. She managed compliance. She oversaw financial controls. If she claimed responsibility, The sentence would be lighter. He would remain in place. He would stabilize the company. He would fight for her appeal. "This is temporary," he said. "We win together." Just like always. He did not threaten her. He did not raise his voice. He spoke about love, about sacrifice, about protecting what they built. And Josephine made the choice in silence. She convinced herself she was saving employees, saving the company, saving her husband. She never asked the one question that mattered. If the roles were reversed, would he do the same for her? The courtroom was silent when Josephine stood. Reporters filled the back rows. Investors watched from behind dark suits and guarded expressions. She adjusted the microphone. "I acted alone," she said. No hesitation, no glance toward Dorian. She claimed responsibility for the unauthorized transfers. She told the court her husband had no knowledge of the decisions. Gasps moved through the room. Dorian lowered his head at the defense table. Cameras captured him wiping his eyes. The judge delivered the sentence with formal detachment. 5 years. 5 years for financial misconduct tied to executive fraud. 5 years that would permanently attach her name to scandal. As marshals led her away, Dorian embraced her. "I'll fix this," he whispered. The headlines the next morning painted him as the devastated husband rebuilding after betrayal. Halcrest biotech stock dipped, then stabilized. Inside prison, Josephine learned routine. Outside prison, Dorian rebuilt reputation. And now, 5 years later, she stands free. He stands successful, with another woman at his side. That is where our story begins. Let's go back to the moment she stepped out of those gates. Because this time, she is no longer the woman who confuses sacrifice with love. And this time, she is not walking into silence. She is walking into truth. Josephine Powers did not grow up around wealth. She grew up around effort. Her mother worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a hospital cafeteria and evening bookkeeping for a small construction firm. Josephine learned early that stability was not a gift. It was built line by line, dollar by dollar. While other teenagers focused on trends and popularity, she studied numbers. She liked structure. She liked clarity. Numbers did not lie. They revealed patterns. They rewarded discipline. Their apartment was small but organized. Bills were tracked in labeled folders. Grocery lists were planned down to the cent. Josephine watched her mother stretch limited income into something sustainable. That became her first lesson in financial control. At 17, she earned a scholarship to study finance. At 22, she graduated with honors. Professors described her as precise and composed under pressure. She did not seek attention. She sought results. Success, to her, meant security. It meant never having to panic over overdue notices. It meant protecting the people she loved from instability. What she did not realize was this. Her greatest strength, loyalty rooted in responsibility, would later become her blind spot. She believed that partnership meant shared burden. If one person struggled, the other stepped in. If one person faltered, the other compensated. That belief shaped every decision she made in adulthood. And it shaped the man she would eventually choose. They met in Chicago at a biotech and finance summit. Josephine had been invited to speak on risk mitigation in emerging tech markets. She stood under bright conference lights, presenting data with calm authority. Her slides were clean, her projections realistic, her tone steady. Dorian Halcrest was in the audience. At the time, he was already gaining attention as a rising biotech founder. Charismatic, vision-driven, confident without appearing reckless. After her presentation, he approached her. "You're the first analyst who didn't exaggerate growth projections," he said. "You protected the downside." She replied evenly, "Ambition without structure collapses." That sentence held his attention. They spoke for nearly an hour near the exhibition floor. Around them, conversations buzzed and camera flashes popped. Neither noticed. He admired her restraint. She admired his vision. He spoke about revolutionizing healthcare innovation. She asked about compliance structures. He described expansion plans. She questioned sustainability models. Their dialogue felt balanced. That night, he invited her to dinner. Not as a flirtation, as a continuation of strategy. What began as professional alignment shifted quickly into something more personal. He saw her as essential. She saw him as driven but worth supporting. The partnership began not with romance, but with mutual ambition. Their relationship accelerated through collaboration. Dorian would sketch out bold expansion plans late at night. Josephine would refine them into executable frameworks. He thrived on vision. She thrived on precision. In private meetings, he often deferred to her analysis before presenting to investors. When tension filled conference rooms, she remained steady. When discussions grew aggressive, she redirected them with data. They challenged each other. Intellectually. He pushed for scale. She pushed for safeguards. Friends described them as dynamic. Colleagues described them as unstoppable. What no one saw was the subtle shift that began forming. Dorian enjoyed applause. Josephine felt satisfied by stability. He measured success through headlines. She measured success through risk control. At first, those differences complemented each other. She believed she grounded him. He believed she strengthened him. In truth, she was becoming the structural backbone of Halcrest Biotech. And slowly, invisibly, she was positioning herself behind him rather than beside him. Their wedding was elegant but strategic. Business leaders attended. Industry journalists covered the event. Photos appeared in financial magazines under captions describing them as the future of biotech leadership. Josephine wore a minimalist gown. Dorian delivered a speech about shared vision and shared victories. "We win together," he said, raising a glass. The phrase became their motto. Marriage did not slow them down. It accelerated expansion. Within 2 years, Halcrest Biotech secured international investors. Offices opened overseas. Revenue projections doubled. Josephine handled internal controls and compliance systems. She managed board documentation and financial oversight. She ensured every aggressive move had calculated protection. At home, conversations revolved around growth metrics and acquisition targets. Romance blended with strategy. Success felt shared. But gradually, recognition tilted. Interviewers asked Dorian about innovation. Rarely did they ask about financial integrity. Magazine covers featured his face. Josephine appeared beside him as supportive spouse. The illusion of equal partnership remained intact, but visibility began shifting in one direction. Inside Halcrest Biotech, senior executives knew the truth. Josephine was the stabilizer. Before any major transfer, she reviewed exposure. Before any acquisition, she assessed regulatory implications. She developed internal audit systems that impressed even skeptical board members. Dorian often said privately, "I don't move without her." Yet publicly, credit rarely shifted. When profits exceeded projections, headlines praised Dorian's strategic genius. When quarterly calls impressed investors, analysts cited his leadership. Josephine did not demand recognition. She believed strength did not require spotlight. Late nights became routine. Spreadsheets illuminated dark rooms. She tracked global transactions while Dorian prepared keynote speeches. She felt pride watching him succeed. She believed his success was theirs. But power has gravity, and gravity eventually pulls attention toward the loudest voice. Josephine continued building the structure. Dorian continued standing on it. Television interviews increased. Dorian appeared on financial networks discussing innovation and resilience. Hosts praised his risk tolerance. Commentators admired his confidence. Josephine watched from the edge of frames. At award ceremonies, he accepted trophies. At investor galas, he delivered keynote addresses. Her name appeared in company filings. His name appeared in headlines. She told herself this was temporary. Visibility fluctuates. Roles differ. But small moments revealed imbalance. Reporters once asked Dorian how he managed such precise financial execution. He smiled and replied, "Strong internal systems." He did not mention her. Not intentionally, not maliciously. But omission speaks. Josephine noticed applause becoming addictive for him. She noticed his answers growing broader, less cautious. Ambition intensified. Pressure mounted. And the partnership that once felt equal began shifting into something fragile. From the outside, they were the perfect power couple. From the inside, one foundation was carrying more weight than the other, and foundations, when overloaded, eventually crack. Growth changed the atmosphere inside Halcrest Biotech. What began as focused expansion shifted into aggressive expectation. Venture capital firms demanded faster returns. Board members pushed for global dominance before competitors could catch up. Quarterly meetings no longer centered on sustainability. They centered on acceleration. During one tense board session, a major investor leaned forward and said, "Speed determines survival. Conservative growth will cost us market share." Dorian nodded. Josephine took notes. Pressure moved from external voices into internal culture. Departments were urged to produce results ahead of schedule. Research timelines shortened. Forecasts were adjusted to reflect optimism rather than caution. Josephine reviewed updated projections late into the night. Numbers that once aligned cleanly now required stretching assumptions. Cash flow models depended heavily on anticipated funding rounds. She raised concerns in private. "If we overextend, exposure multiplies," she said. Dorian responded with confidence. "Investors reward boldness. We can't look hesitant." The language had changed. Before, they discussed protection and scalability. Now, conversations focused on perception and dominance. Employees began sensing the shift. Urgency replaced measured planning. Risk tolerance increased quietly. Josephine understood market pressure. She understood ambition. What unsettled her was the speed at which balance disappeared. And for the first time since their marriage began, she felt tension between her responsibility to protect the company and Dorian's desire to impress the people funding it. The alignment that once felt effortless began to strain. The first irregular transaction appeared routine. A subsidiary account overseas authorized a significant capital movement tied to strategic partnerships. On paper, it appeared structured for tax efficiency and global positioning. Josephine flagged it for review. The second transfer followed within weeks. Larger, routed through a layered holding structure that required executive approval. She requested documentation. Compliance responded with partial summaries. Legal sent brief confirmations. The details felt incomplete. When she examined authorization logs, she saw Dorian's signature attached to several expedited approvals. She scheduled a meeting. "These transfers are aggressive," she said calmly. "We need full board acknowledgement before executing this scale." Dorian leaned back in his chair. "It's temporary restructuring," he replied. "We're positioning for acquisition leverage." She studied him carefully. "Why bypass standard review timing?" He responded smoothly. "Timing is everything. Delay weakens negotiation." The explanations were strategic, but the structure lacked transparency. Over the next quarter, additional offshore allocations moved through similar channels. Each one framed as tactical. Each one pushing regulatory boundaries without clearly crossing them. Josephine tightened internal controls where she could. She documented conversations. She requested written confirmations. Yet she allowed the transactions to proceed. Trust influenced that decision. She believed he understood limits. She believed he would not compromise the company they built. What she did not realize was that ambition, once accelerated, often seeks shortcuts. And shortcuts leave trails. Doubt did not strike suddenly. It accumulated. Late at night, Josephine revisited transaction logs alone in her office. The city skyline glowed beyond the windows while spreadsheets reflected against her glasses. Certain patterns did not align. Transfers initiated before internal memos circulated. Approvals marked urgent without sufficient explanation. Accounts linked through complex networks that obscured direct traceability. She asked herself practical questions. Were they innovating financial strategy or stretching compliance boundaries? During a quarterly review, she noticed Dorian presenting projected stability, while offshore exposure quietly increased. After the meeting, she approached him again. "We need independent oversight," she suggested. "An external audit before expansion continues." He paused. "That sends the wrong signal," he replied. "It suggests instability." "It suggests accountability," she countered. He placed his hands on her shoulders, tone softening. "You're overanalyzing because you care. That's why I trust you. But this is controlled." Controlled. The word lingered. Josephine wanted to believe him. She wanted alignment restored. Instead, she began creating private backups of internal documentation, not as preparation for conflict, as reassurance. Her instincts told her something required closer attention. Her heart told her not to question the man she loved. That internal conflict marked the first fracture. Trust remained, but certainty weakened. Dorian adapted quickly to concern. Where Josephine saw exposure, he saw positioning. During executive briefings, he reframed accelerated transfers as visionary moves. He described offshore restructuring as intelligent market leverage. Investors responded positively to bold language. Confidence became his shield. In private, he spoke differently. If we hesitate, competitors dominate, he told her. Calculated risk defines industry leaders. Josephine listened carefully. Calculated risk required clear documentation and shared accountability. Yet documentation continued arriving late. Board summaries remained selective. He began separating conversations. Strategic discussions occurred without full compliance representation. Financial decisions were communicated after execution rather than before. When Josephine questioned this shift, he offered reassurance. "I'm protecting you," he said. "If regulators ever question structure, you can say you weren't involved in operational approvals." The statement unsettled her. Protection implied potential danger. She studied him. "You think regulators might question this?" He smiled lightly. "Every successful company attracts scrutiny." His tone minimized her concern. Yet the operational pattern had changed. Risk was no longer a tool managed carefully. It was becoming a posture adopted publicly. Dorian appeared energized by speed. Josephine felt tension building beneath it. The partnership dynamic was shifting from collaboration to persuasion, and persuasion can hide imbalance. The first sign of visible fear came during a private investor dinner. One board member hinted at potential federal review due to aggressive capital structuring. The comment was casual but pointed. Dorian's expression tightened briefly before he recovered. Later that night, in their penthouse living room, Josephine saw something new in him. Not concern about legal exposure, concern about reputation. "If regulators misinterpret this," he said, pacing slowly, "the media will destroy years of work. Competitors will celebrate." She watched him carefully. "You're worried about the company," she said. "I'm worried about perception," he corrected. There it was. Perception. The word carried weight. He described headlines, stock dips, public doubt, investor retreat. Humiliation, not incarceration, fueled his anxiety. Josephine realized something critical in that moment. If forced to choose between preserving image and preserving truth, Dorian's priority was clear. He built his identity on admiration, on control, on public validation. The thought of scandal threatened more than profit. It threatened ego. And ego, when threatened, defends itself fiercely. As tension increased, Josephine sensed the company approaching a threshold. The cracks in trust widened quietly. The transfers continued. The pressure mounted. And somewhere between ambition and fear, the foundation of their marriage began to weaken. The notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. Formal, direct, unavoidable. A federal compliance review had been initiated into Halcrest Biotech's offshore capital movements. Specific quarters were cited. Specific accounts were named. Josephine read the document twice before walking into Dorian's office. He was already aware. His screen displayed the same notice. "They're requesting full documentation," she said calmly. "Executive authorization logs included." He stood up slowly. "We anticipated scrutiny," he replied. "This doesn't mean guilt." But the timing told a different story. Regulators were not asking casual questions. They were requesting internal communications tied to expedited transfers. They wanted signatures, approval chains, board confirmations. Josephine's mind moved through every transaction she had questioned, every late memo, every discussion that lacked clarity. "This will expose structural inconsistencies," she said. He remained quiet for a moment. For the first time since expansion began, his confidence appeared restrained. "They're overreaching," he finally responded. "Competitors push for these reviews when they can't compete." She did not argue. She understood federal audits did not originate from competitors' jealousy. They originated from red flags. Within hours, legal counsel requested emergency strategy meetings. The board scheduled a closed session. Investors began calling. By afternoon, media outlets had caught wind of potential review. The pressure that once lived in conference rooms now stepped into public view. And Josephine felt a certainty forming inside her. This was no longer about aggressive strategy. It was about accountability. That night, their penthouse felt unfamiliar. City lights glowed beyond the glass walls, but the atmosphere inside was heavy. Josephine entered Dorian's study, without knocking. Stacks of documents covered his desk. His tie was loosened, his posture rigid. "We need transparency," she said immediately. "Every document, every approval, no filtering." He rubbed his temples. "It's not that simple." Her heart tightened. "Why isn't it simple?" Silence stretched. He avoided her eyes. Then he spoke carefully. "If they trace full authorization chains, exposure escalates." She stepped closer. "Exposure to what, Dorian?" He exhaled sharply. "To executive-level decision-making that won't be interpreted kindly." There it was. Not innocence, not confidence, concern. She felt something shift internally. "Did you bypass full board review?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "I accelerated approvals. For growth." She absorbed the answer. Acceleration meant risk. Risk, without shared acknowledgement, meant liability. "Why didn't you loop me into the final authorizations?" she asked. "I didn't want you implicated if it ever came under review." The statement landed with quiet force. She stared at him. Implication suggested inevitability, and inevitability suggested he had known. He walked toward her slowly. "This can still be managed," he said. "But we need to control the narrative." She remained still. "How?" He looked directly at her. "Your name appears on compliance documentation. You oversee financial governance. If responsibility is centralized, the company survives." The implication settled between them. "You want me to take the fall," she said evenly. He did not deny it. "It would be framed as isolated overreach, operational misjudgment. Your sentence would be limited." Limited. She felt her pulse in her throat. "And you?" she asked. "I remain in position. I stabilize operations. I secure investor confidence. Then I fight for your appeal." He stepped closer. "We built this together. If the company collapses, thousands lose jobs. Years of work disappear." He lowered his voice. "I can't fix this from inside a prison." The word hung in the air. Prison. He reached for her hands. "I need you to protect what we created." Need, not want. Need. And Josephine felt the weight of her upbringing pressing against her conscience. Protect, stabilize, sacrifice. Those instincts had shaped her entire life. Now they were being redirected toward his survival. There was no shouting. No threats. Only calm calculation. Dorian spoke in measured tones. He outlined sentencing projections. He referenced similar cases where executive spouses received reduced penalties. He cited legal counsel's assessment. "This isn't permanent," he repeated. 5 years maximum. Likely less with good behavior. 5 years. He said it as though describing a temporary relocation. "You'd be seen as protecting intellectual property boundaries," he added. "Not malicious fraud." She studied his face. He believed what he was saying, or he needed to believe it. "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly. He paused. "If both of us are charged, the company collapses. Investors withdraw. Employees lose everything." He did not say the final part aloud. His reputation would shatter. Josephine felt something fragile breaking inside her. This conversation was not about right or wrong. It was about preservation of image. "You're asking me to carry this," she said. "I'm asking you to save us." The phrase settled heavily. Save us. The wording shifted responsibility onto her shoulders. And persuasion can be more powerful than pressure, because persuasion disguises self-interest as shared destiny. 5 years earlier, at their wedding reception, Dorian had raised a glass and said, "We win together." It sounded like partnership. Now the language changed. "Save us," he repeated softly. "Save the company. Save the jobs. Save our future." He framed her sacrifice as proof of devotion, as evidence of unity, as strategic necessity. Josephine felt the internal battle intensify. She pictured employees with families, She pictured media scrutiny. She pictured Dorian's face under public accusation. And she pictured herself inside a cell. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "If I do this, you fix it," she said. "You rebuild for both of us." "I swear," he replied immediately. The promise sounded certain, but promises made under fear often protect the speaker first. That night, Josephine chose loyalty over self-protection. She chose belief over doubt, and that decision would cost her 5 years. "Let me ask you something. Would you have taken the blame to protect your partner?" Comment yes or no, because Josephine did not hesitate. She signed the confession, and the next chapter of her life began with a judge's gavel. The courtroom felt colder than Josephine expected. Not physically, emotionally. Rows of observers filled the gallery. Reporters adjusted cameras. Legal teams shuffled documents. The weight of public scrutiny pressed against every surface. Josephine stood when instructed. Her attorney had reviewed the statement with her the night before. Clear, direct, accepting sole responsibility for unauthorized financial transfers conducted under her supervision. The judge asked if she understood the charges. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge asked if she entered the plea voluntarily. Yes. No tremor. No visible hesitation. She did not look toward the gallery. She did not search for reassurance. Dorian sat behind her at the defense table, posture rigid. His hands were clasped tightly. To the outside observer, he looked devastated. Josephine focused on the script she had chosen. "I approved the transfers," she stated. "My decisions exceeded appropriate governance limits. My husband had no knowledge of the execution." The words echoed softly through the courtroom. Every syllable sealed distance between truth and public record. The prosecution outlined financial damages and regulatory breaches. The defense emphasized cooperation and lack of malicious intent. Josephine listened without reaction. This was the path she had agreed to walk. The judge delivered the sentence with measured neutrality. 5 years in federal prison. The gavel struck. In that instant, partnership transformed into isolation, and the world began forming its version of the story. Before Josephine was even transported, media outlets began shaping interpretation. News anchors described the case as an internal compliance failure. Commentators praised corporate transparency. Analysts discussed how Halcrest Biotech could recover under steady leadership. Dorian's legal team moved quickly. Press releases emphasized his shock, his disappointment, his commitment to reform. Statements highlighted that he had trusted internal financial systems and was personally devastated by the breach. Language matters. Josephine became the executive who mismanaged oversight. Dorian became the visionary blindsided by internal error. The framing was subtle but effective. Television segments replayed footage of Dorian standing solemnly outside the courthouse. Headlines described him as resilient under crisis. No one discussed the private conversation in the penthouse. No one questioned how executive authorizations had been structured. The public absorbed a simple storyline. Brilliant CEO betrayed by internal misjudgment. Josephine watched coverage briefly before transport. She saw analysts say the company was fortunate to have a strong leader guiding recovery. She heard the word victim used indirectly, and she understood something critical. The narrative was already moving forward. Without her, public perception did not require full truth. It required clarity and confidence. Dorian provided both. As Josephine was escorted toward the transport vehicle, cameras crowded near the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions. "Did you know about the transfers? How will this affect the company? Do you stand by your wife?" Dorian stepped to the microphones. His voice trembled. "I trusted the internal systems," he said. "I trusted the person I loved." He paused, pressing fingers briefly to his eyes. "I am heartbroken." The image circulated instantly. Footage of him wiping tears played across financial networks and social media platforms. Clips highlighted his composure under emotional strain. Commentators described his strength in facing public embarrassment. Josephine saw the replay days later during intake processing. She studied his expression. The tears looked real, but they served a purpose. Emotion humanized him. Emotion separated him from culpability. The narrative solidified. He had been hurt. He had been blindsided. He was rebuilding. Inside the prison transport vehicle, Josephine sat quietly. No cameras followed her. No microphones amplified her sacrifice. Public sympathy attached itself to the man who remained visible. And sympathy is a powerful shield. Within 48 hours, national business publications published full analyses. Halcrest CEO faces personal betrayal amid compliance crisis. Resilient leadership steadies biotech firm after internal failure. Josephine's name appeared in smaller print beneath subheadings describing unauthorized decisions. Opinion columns praised Dorian's transparency. Investors publicly expressed confidence in his continued leadership. Stock prices dipped temporarily, then stabilized. Board members released statements affirming support. He attended emergency meetings. He conducted controlled interviews. He emphasized reform. The company positioned itself as learning from internal oversight lapses. Josephine's photograph accompanied articles about corporate accountability. Dorian's photograph accompanied stories about endurance. The contrast was striking. In private, she had protected him. In public, he was positioned as the injured party. Support disguised abandonment. Sympathy masked self-preservation. And Josephine entered prison not only carrying a sentence, but carrying a public identity constructed without her consent. The betrayal was not loud. It was refined, carefully framed, presented as unfortunate necessity. And as the prison gates closed behind her for the first time, Josephine understood a painful truth. Love had asked her for sacrifice. Image had accepted it without hesitation. Federal intake stripped Josephine of every external title within minutes. No executive office, no tailored suits, no recognition, just a number. Her personal belongings were cataloged. Her clothing replaced with standard issue fabric. Her name spoken without status attached. The first night in her assigned unit felt suffocating. Metal bunk, thin mattress, fluorescent lighting that never fully dimmed. Conversations whispered between strangers who assessed newcomers carefully. Some inmates recognized her from news coverage. "You're the biotech one, right?" Someone asked casually. Josephine nodded once. She could feel judgment in the air. Not for the crime itself, for the fall. White-collar cases carried their own reputation inside federal facilities. Some assumed arrogance. Others assumed privilege. Humiliation came in small doses. Standing in line for meals, being counted repeatedly, following orders delivered without warmth. No one cared about board meetings or investor calls. And yet Josephine did not break. She observed. She learned routines quickly. She avoided confrontation. She kept her posture steady. The hardest part was not the structure. It was realizing how easily her former world had replaced her. Halcrest Biotech continued operating. Media coverage moved on. Her absence did not collapse anything. The illusion of indispensability disappeared. Humiliation, when faced honestly, strips ego. And in that stripped state, Josephine began confronting a deeper truth. She had tied her identity to someone else's vision. Now she had to rebuild it without him. Isolation settled in after the first month. Phone privileges were limited, visits scheduled and supervised, letters screened. Dorian visited twice during the first 6 weeks. He spoke about stabilizing operations, about restructuring compliance departments, about investors regaining confidence. He held her hands across the small metal table and promised progress on her appeal. She listened quietly. After the second visit, the frequency shifted. Work demands, he explained. Travel obligations, board negotiations. Calls shortened. Emails grew brief. By the 6th month, visits became rare. Josephine stopped counting days by his messages. Instead, she began counting by her own milestones. 30 days, without incident. 60 days maintaining composure. 90 days without emotional collapse. Prison isolates not only physically but socially. Conversations are cautious. Trust develops slowly. Josephine spent evenings reading alone. She exercised during open recreation hours. She avoided unnecessary alliances. Silence became her companion. In that silence, memories replayed with sharper detail. Conversations in the penthouse, authorization logs, the way he said, "Save us." Isolation removed distraction. Without external noise, her thoughts gained clarity. She began asking questions she had avoided outside. Why had he bypassed board review before involving her? Why had he prepared press statements so quickly? Why had his fear centered on perception rather than accountability? Isolation does not always weaken. Sometimes it forces examination, and examination often leads to awakening. By her second year, Josephine requested access to legal textbooks. Federal prison libraries were modest, but sufficient. She began studying compliance statutes, corporate liability frameworks, and case precedents involving executive authorization, not to reverse her sentence, to understand the full structure of what had occurred. She analyzed similar cases where CEOs claimed ignorance of financial misconduct. She reviewed how courts determined knowledge versus delegation. Patterns emerged. In many instances, executive-level intent was disguised through layered authorization. Responsibility shifted downward while strategic direction remained upward. Josephine compared those cases with her own timeline. She reconstructed transaction dates from memory. She noted when offshore transfers began relative to internal memos. Something unsettled her. Several initial transactions occurred before she signed off on revised compliance frameworks, which meant approvals had originated elsewhere. She studied the federal guidelines for willful authorization. The deeper she researched, the clearer the gaps became. Her confession had simplified a complex chain of command. She had claimed sole responsibility, but the system required multiple executive validations for the scale involved. Realization did not bring rage. It brought precision. She began writing structured notes, documenting inconsistencies from memory. Not accusations, observations. Knowledge replaced emotional fog, and with knowledge came a painful clarity. She had protected more than a company. She had protected a carefully constructed image. By her third year, other inmates began approaching her quietly. Some struggled with financial literacy. Others needed help understanding restitution orders or budgeting limited commissary funds. Josephine offered assistance. She explained interest calculations. She created simple budgeting templates. She clarified how restitution percentages were applied to prison wages. Word spread. Women who once kept distance began asking questions respectfully. For the first time since sentencing, Josephine felt useful again. Not as a corporate executive, as a resource. She organized informal study sessions in the common area. She broke down legal language into understandable steps. She encouraged others to prepare for life after release. Helping others reshaped her perspective. She saw women who had made impulsive decisions, women who lacked guidance, women who had never been taught financial structure. Her own mistake looked different through that lens. She had possessed knowledge. She had ignored warning signs, not out of ignorance, out of loyalty. That distinction mattered. Service restored dignity. It reminded her that expertise did not vanish because circumstances changed. Strength grew quietly, not through status, through contribution, and each day she assisted someone else, she felt a small piece of identity return. Clarity did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated gradually, like light entering a dark room inch by inch. By year 4, Josephine no longer replayed courtroom scenes with regret. She replayed conversations with analytical distance. She remembered how Dorian positioned sacrifice as strategic necessity. She remembered how quickly press releases followed her confession. She remembered his relief the night she agreed. Not sorrow, relief. That memory changed everything. Love does not feel relieved when the person you cherish accepts prison on your behalf. It feels devastated. Josephine acknowledged something difficult. He had prioritized survival. She had prioritized devotion. Those priorities were never equal. By year 5, she stopped imagining reunion fantasies. She stopped rehearsing apologies he might give. Instead, she envisioned rebuilding independently, not with vengeance, with integrity. Clarity reshaped her understanding of partnership. True partnership requires shared accountability. True love does not require one person to carry legal consequences alone. When release day approached, Josephine did not feel excitement. She felt readiness. Prison had removed illusion. What remained was truth, and truth would guide her next decision. During the first months of her sentence, Dorian came regularly. He wore muted suits instead of bold colors. He sat across from her in the visitation room with controlled sadness. He spoke about legal appeals in progress and compliance restructuring underway. "I'm fixing this," he would say. "You won't serve the full term." Josephine listened with quiet trust, but consistency began to fracture. Bi-weekly visits became monthly. Monthly visits shifted to vague scheduling conflicts, board travel, investor negotiations, international meetings. Each explanation sounded professional, reasonable, necessary. Yet something inside her started counting more than his words. She noticed how quickly he stood up when visitation hours ended, how often he glanced at his phone, how efficiently he updated her on business milestones without asking deeper questions about her adjustment. The emotional weight in his tone lessened over time. By the end of her first year, he canceled twice in a row. The third time, he sent his assistant to deliver personal items instead. Josephine folded the delivered sweater carefully on her bunk. She did not cry. Instead, she studied the pattern. Presence had once been proof of partnership. Now absence was becoming evidence of something else. By year 2, she stopped checking the visitation schedule daily. By year 3, she understood that waiting was no longer productive. Denial requires hope, and hope, when unsupported by action, slowly weakens. After in-person visits declined, communication shifted almost entirely to monitored email exchanges. At first, his messages were long. He detailed board decisions, legal strategies, and internal reforms. He attached summaries of compliance improvements. He signed each message with reassurance. "Stay strong. We'll get through this." Gradually, the tone changed. Updates became concise. Personal language disappeared. Business dominated the conversation. We secured new funding. Quarterly results exceeded expectations. Legal team reviewing options. Josephine reread earlier emails and compared them with recent ones. The difference was measurable. Affection had been replaced with efficiency. She responded thoughtfully at first. She asked about strategy shifts. She suggested structural safeguards. She maintained professionalism even inside confinement. His replies often arrived hours later. Then, days later, sometimes not at all. When she mentioned appeal status in one message, his answer was brief. "Still reviewing feasibility." No elaboration, no urgency. Josephine realized something critical. He was moving forward, and she existed as part of a chapter he preferred to close quietly. The emotional warmth that once defined their private communication had cooled into formal updates. By her 4th year, she shortened her own replies, not out of resentment, out of recognition. Conversations require mutual investment, and investment, like visits, had faded. Television coverage continued inside the prison common room. Business segments occasionally referenced Halcrest Biotech, particularly when new research milestones were announced. Josephine watched without visible reaction. At first, analysts still mentioned the compliance case when discussing the company. They framed it as a lesson learned, a moment of internal misjudgment corrected through leadership. Over time, even that reference diminished. New headlines focused on expansion, partnerships, innovation breakthroughs. Dorian appeared confident during interviews. He spoke about transparency reforms and strengthened oversight. He emphasized growth and forward movement. Josephine noticed something subtle. Her name was mentioned less frequently. The case was reclassified as a resolved chapter. Public memory shortened. The narrative shifted from scandal to resilience. Dorian's language became more polished. "We've emerged stronger," he stated in one televised segment. Emergence implied survival. Survival implied challenge overcome. And Josephine realized the company had not merely recovered. It had repositioned. Her sacrifice had functioned as insulation. Media attention, once intense, now treated the situation as corporate history. Watching this transformation did not ignite anger. It confirmed reality. The world does not pause for absence. It adapts. And Dorian had adapted quickly. By year 5, Josephine no longer searched for signs of regret in his public appearances. She studied him analytically. His posture during interviews was steady, his language disciplined. He referenced ethical responsibility frequently, positioning himself as a leader who strengthened governance after internal failure. Awards returned. Industry panels invited him again. Photographs from galas showed him surrounded by investors and consultants. One image lingered longer than the rest. A public relations consultant stood beside him repeatedly in event coverage. Celeste Armand. Josephine recognized her from press releases. Poised, strategic, always near. Their proximity suggested collaboration beyond formal consulting. Josephine did not confront him about it. Instead, she observed how seamlessly he had reconstructed credibility. The company thrived, the narrative stabilized, and his life continued uninterrupted. That observation completed her acceptance. He had not paused his world for her. He had reorganized it. Acceptance does not arrive with drama. It settles quietly. By the time release paperwork was processed, Josephine felt no expectation of reunion, only curiosity. Curiosity about how a man who asked her to save them would stand when faced with her freedom. And she would soon find out. The prison gates opened with mechanical finality. Josephine stepped forward into sharp daylight, carrying one small bag and 5 years of hard-earned clarity. The air felt different, unfiltered, wide. Across the parking lot stood Dorian. Impeccable suit, controlled posture, expression carefully composed. Beside him stood Celeste Armand, not behind him, not at a distance, beside him, close enough to signal presence, confident enough to signal permanence. Josephine walked toward them at an even pace. Dorian spoke first. "You look well." "I had 5 years to think," she replied. No tension in her voice, no accusation, just fact. He cleared his throat. "Josephine, this is Celeste. She's been advising us through restructuring. She helped stabilize communications during the investigation." Celeste stepped forward smoothly, extending her hand. "It's good to finally meet you," she said, tone polished and measured. "You showed remarkable strength." Strength. Josephine held her gaze for a fraction longer than necessary. Strength meant survival. It did not mean partnership. Celeste's smile remained composed, professional, controlled. Josephine shook her hand once and released it. She did not miss the detail that Celeste did not introduce herself as temporary. She introduced herself as someone integrated into Dorian's world. The introduction carried no apology, no discomfort, just transition. And in that exchange, Josephine recognized something crucial. The space she once occupied had not remained empty. It had been reassigned. Josephine noticed everything. 5 years inside had sharpened her awareness. Celeste stood angled slightly toward Dorian, not fully facing him, not fully facing away. A posture that suggested familiarity rather than formality. When Dorian spoke, Celeste's fingers rested lightly near his sleeve. Not gripping, not claiming, simply positioned. Comfort without hesitation. At one point, Dorian adjusted his cufflink. Celeste instinctively smoothed the fabric near his wrist. The movement was small, intimate, practiced. Josephine absorbed it without reaction. Dorian did not step away from the contact. He did not create distance to signal boundaries. Instead, he continued speaking about logistical arrangements, as if nothing unusual stood between them. Josephine compared this image with her last memory before incarceration. His arms around her shoulders in the courthouse hallway, his voice whispering promises. Now, his body language belonged to someone else's rhythm. Celeste did not appear nervous. She appeared secure. Security implies time. Time implies development. Josephine understood the implication. This relationship did not begin recently. It evolved while she served the sentence meant to protect him. She felt no jealousy, only clarity. The physical cues confirmed what the faded visits and shortened emails had already revealed. He had reorganized his life long before she stepped out of those gates. And he did not expect her to question it. Dorian gestured toward the black sedan. "I've arranged a private apartment downtown," he said. "Fully furnished, secure. You won't have to deal with media." His tone was efficient, transactional. Celeste nodded slightly, as if confirming a completed plan. "There's staff available to assist with re-entry logistics," Dorian continued. "Financial access has been restored under a separate account." Josephine listened. He had prepared comfort. He had prepared containment. An apartment positioned as generosity, but structured as distance. "You'll have privacy," he added. "Time to adjust." Adjust. The word carried weight. Adjust to freedom. Adjust to reputation damage. Adjust to watching him stand beside another woman. Josephine studied him carefully. He avoided eye contact for a fraction of a second before continuing. This is the least I can do. Least. Not apology. Not acknowledgement. Compensation. 5 years reduced to furnished square footage. She pictured the penthouse they once shared. The late-night planning sessions. The vows about shared victories. Now he offered controlled independence. Not reconciliation. Not accountability. Just accommodation. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer asking her to save them. He was offering to manage her. Josephine let the silence stretch briefly. Then she spoke. I won't need the apartment. Dorian blinked once. It's already arranged, he replied. I won't need it, she repeated. Her tone remained steady. No hostility, no raised voice. Celeste's posture tightened slightly. Dorian adjusted his stance. You'll need stability while things settle, he insisted. Public perception takes time. I've had 5 years to settle, Josephine answered. The sentence landed softly but decisively. Dorian opened his mouth as if to continue persuading. She held up her hand slightly. I appreciate the offer, she said, but I'll handle my own transition. There was no confrontation, no dramatic exit, just refusal. In that moment, the balance shifted. For 5 years she had carried consequence to protect his position. Now she stood free and declined his provision. Independence replaced obligation. He was accustomed to directing outcomes. She had just removed herself from his control. Celeste watched carefully, assessing the exchange. Josephine met Dorian's eyes one final time. You don't need to fix anything for me, she said. I've already rebuilt. Then she stepped past them, not toward the car, toward her own path. And for the first time since the audit began, Dorian was the one left standing without leverage. The shift had begun. Josephine did not hold a press conference after her release. She did not write an open letter. She updated her resume. Within 3 weeks, she began consulting quietly for small technology startups that lacked structured compliance systems. These were not billion-dollar corporations. They were growing teams operating out of shared office spaces and remote platforms. Many founders hesitated at first when they recognized her name. She addressed it directly. Yes, I serve time. And yes, I understand compliance failure better than most. There was no defensiveness in her tone, only clarity. Her first client struggled with disorganized capital reporting. She rebuilt their financial oversight framework from the ground up. She implemented layered approval protocols. She insisted on written authorization trails for every major transaction. She did not allow shortcuts. Word spread. Not about scandal, about discipline. Founders began recommending her to other founders. They valued her precision. They valued her refusal to tolerate ambiguity. For the first time in years, Josephine worked without shadow. No CEO standing in front of cameras while she remained behind spreadsheets. She chose her projects carefully. Companies willing to commit to structure. Leaders open to accountability. She rebuilt slowly, intentionally, and she did it without mentioning Dorian's name. Josephine's consulting approach centered on one principle: transparency protects everyone. She spoke openly with clients about governance blind spots. She explained how ambition can distort decision-making. She demonstrated how unchecked acceleration leads to regulatory exposure. During strategy sessions, she asked direct questions. Who signs off on this? Who verifies it? Who challenges it? If answers were vague, she did not proceed. Her reputation began shifting from former executive to compliance authority. At a regional business forum, she was invited to speak about corporate accountability. The room expected a defensive narrative. Instead, she delivered a precise analysis of systemic oversight failure. Ethics are not emotional, she said. They are structural. If your system relies on trust without verification, you are building vulnerability. Attendees took notes. She did not portray herself as victim. She positioned herself as case study. That distinction strengthened her credibility. Transparency became her anchor. She shared lessons learned without exposing confidential details. She emphasized documentation discipline. She urged leaders to separate personal loyalty from professional responsibility. Each speech reinforced a new identity: not disgraced executive, reformed strategist. And slowly, invitations expanded beyond local panels. Her voice carried weight because it carried consequence. While rebuilding professionally, Josephine reviewed archived materials she had preserved before sentencing. Encrypted backups stored off-site, copies of internal emails, time-stamped authorization drafts. At the time, she had kept them for reassurance. Now she examined them with analytical distance. She cross-referenced transfer initiation dates against executive approvals. She mapped decision flow patterns. She noted discrepancies between public statements and internal communication. Her approach was methodical. No emotional reaction, just data. Certain offshore transfers originated before compliance review processes were formally adjusted. Executive authorizations appeared layered in a sequence inconsistent with her courtroom confession. She did not contact regulators. She did not leak information impulsively. Instead, she organized documentation chronologically. She consulted privately with a legal ethics advisor to confirm interpretation. She moved cautiously. Correction requires precision. She understood that reckless accusation would undermine credibility. Evidence needed structure. As months passed, she connected with an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate governance reporting. Not to destroy, to clarify. She provided information only when asked directly and only with documented support. No exaggeration, no embellishment. Truth stands strongest when it stands alone. Josephine did not seek revenge. Revenge centers on emotion. Correction centers on integrity. When early articles began questioning inconsistencies in Halcrest Biotech's past compliance timeline, she did not celebrate. She read carefully. Analysts started asking how executive authorizations bypassed full board disclosure. Investors requested independent review. Regulatory agencies reopened inquiry channels quietly. Dorian issued controlled statements emphasizing continued cooperation. Celeste reduced public appearances. Josephine remained focused on her clients. She did not appear on talk shows. She did not post commentary. Her dignity rested in restraint. Friends asked if she felt satisfaction. She answered honestly, "I feel resolved." Resolution differs from triumph. Triumph demands audience. Resolution requires only self-alignment. As scrutiny intensified, she understood something important. Truth corrects distortion eventually, not because it is loud, because it is consistent. Josephine chose growth over spectacle. She built a professional identity anchored in accountability. She strengthened her expertise. She allowed documented evidence to surface without theatrics. Dignity over drama. That choice distinguished her from the man who once prioritized image, and it positioned her for something she had never experienced before. A partnership built on transparency rather than performance. The first article appeared in a respected financial review journal. It did not accuse. It questioned. An investigative reporter outlined inconsistencies in Halcrest Biotech's historical compliance timeline. The piece compared court records from Josephine's case with internal corporate filings released to shareholders over the past 5 years. The analysis was precise. Transfer initiation dates did not perfectly align with executive oversight summaries made public during restructuring announcements. Certain authorization layers appeared reordered in later disclosures. The article ended with a simple statement: "Further clarification from executive leadership may be warranted." That line carried weight. Within days, additional outlets began revisiting archived filings. Analysts dissected public statements made during the original scandal. Commentary panels debated corporate governance integrity. Josephine read the coverage privately. No smile. No visible reaction. She understood the process unfolding. Truth does not return with fireworks. It re-enters through documentation. Journalists requested interviews with former compliance officers. Some declined. Others provided limited commentary. Dorian's communications team released a brief response reaffirming past transparency and cooperation. But this time, the narrative was not centered solely on her confession. It included structural decision-making at the executive level. Josephine closed her laptop after reading the third feature article. She did not need to say anything. The record was speaking. As public scrutiny intensified, Halcrest Biotech's board of directors convened an emergency session. Independent auditors were commissioned to re-examine prior offshore transactions, not because regulators demanded it immediately, because investors began asking questions. Board members requested full executive authorization logs dating back 6 years. Internal compliance officers were instructed to provide complete documentation without redaction. For the first time since Josephine's sentencing, review extended beyond her signed confession. Audit teams traced financial pathways across subsidiaries. They compared time-stamped approvals with board meeting minutes. They reconstructed transaction flow with forensic accounting tools. Findings revealed accelerated authorizations preceding formal compliance adjustment reports. The issue was no longer framed as isolated internal misjudgment. It was framed as potential executive-level oversight bypass. Dorian addressed the board with controlled confidence. He described rapid expansion pressures. He emphasized intent to protect shareholder value. But data carries its own authority. When presented side by side, documentation revealed inconsistencies between public statements and internal execution timelines. The board did not remove him immediately. They requested clarification. Clarification often precedes consequence. Josephine learned of the audit through industry contacts. She absorbed the information calmly. 5 years earlier, she stood alone in a courtroom. Now review expanded outward, not because she demanded it, because evidence required it. Investors respond quickly to uncertainty. Once audit news surfaced, major shareholders sought reassurance. Conference calls shifted tone. Questions grew sharper. Analysts pressed for direct answers regarding executive authorization protocols. One institutional investor publicly requested a leadership accountability statement. Stock performance wavered, not dramatically, but noticeably. Dorian appeared in a controlled webcast addressing concerns. "We remain committed to full transparency," he stated. "Our leadership team welcomes independent review." His delivery remained steady. But scrutiny does not fade through repetition. Shareholder confidence depends on consistency between words and records. As further audit summaries circulated privately among investors, pressure increased. Some board members began discussing succession planning in confidential channels. Celeste, who once stood prominently beside Dorian during public events, reduced her visibility. Her absence from investor briefings did not go unnoticed. Josephine observed the unfolding shift without contacting anyone. She focused on client meetings and ongoing projects. Friends asked whether she planned to make a public statement. She declined. Her silence was no longer protective. It was disciplined. Exposure does not require participation when documentation exists. And documentation was doing its work. Within weeks, Celeste Armand's presence diminished significantly. She did not appear in scheduled media engagements. Her name was removed from updated communications materials. Industry insiders reported she had transitioned to other advisory projects. The language was neutral. The timing was not. Josephine recognized the pattern. When stability fractures, proximity to controversy becomes liability. Celeste had once stood confidently beside Dorian at public functions. Now distance replaced alignment. The power dynamic was shifting, not loudly, strategically. Dorian attempted to reach Josephine during this period. She allowed one call. His voice carried strain beneath controlled phrasing. "Things are being misinterpreted," he said. "Context matters." She listened, then responded calmly. Context existed 5 years ago. Silence followed. He asked if she would clarify publicly that he had trusted her. She declined. "My silence protected you once," she said. "It won't define me again." When the call ended, she felt no anger, only completion. "Let me ask you something. Is silence strength or weakness? Tell me below." Because Josephine's silence once cost her 5 years. Now it reflected control, and the truth no longer needed her to carry it alone. The invitation arrived through a national corporate governance forum. Josephine had been asked to deliver a keynote address on executive accountability and structural compliance reform. The audience would include founders, legal advisors, and board members from across the tech sector. She accepted without hesitation. The conference hall was modern and understated. No dramatic lighting, no oversized branding. Just a stage, a podium, and an audience prepared to listen. Josephine stepped up calmly. She did not begin with her prison sentence. She began with structure. Accountability is not emotional, she said. It is procedural. If leadership systems allow ambiguity, responsibility will always fall on the most convenient name. The room grew quiet. She outlined frameworks for layered approvals. She emphasized documentation discipline. She discussed how loyalty must never override verification. There was no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. When she referenced her own experience, she did so factually. I signed documents believing shared oversight existed, she stated. Belief is not compliance. Pens moved across notebooks. Executives shifted in their seats. She closed her speech with a direct statement. Ethics protect organizations, but they also protect relationships. Without transparency, both collapse. The applause was steady and respectful, not loud, not theatrical, professional. As she stepped off the stage, she felt something different than validation, alignment, and in the second row, a man with attentive eyes waited patiently for the Q&A session to begin. Rowan Mercer did not rush toward her when the session ended. He waited until the crowd thinned. Mid-30s, simple navy suit. No excessive display of status. His posture relaxed but attentive. When he approached, he did not mention the headlines from her past. He extended his hand. Your breakdown of layered approvals was precise, he said. Most leaders overlook that failure point. Josephine studied him briefly. And you don't? She asked. He shook his head slightly. I built my company after watching one collapse due to weak governance. Structure matters. There was no curiosity in his tone about scandal, only interest in systems. I run a data infrastructure firm, he continued. Mid-sized, private. We prioritize internal review cycles before expansion. His phrasing was deliberate, not flashy, measured. They spoke for several minutes about compliance redundancy and executive accountability. He listened without interrupting. When he asked questions, they were thoughtful and specific. Josephine noticed something rare. He did not attempt to impress her. He did not attempt to fix her narrative. He did not offer sympathy. He engaged as an equal. When someone called his name from across the room, he excused himself politely. It was good meeting you, he said simply. No lingering stare. No performance. Just grounded presence. For the first time in years, Josephine felt conversation without pressure. Rowan followed up with a concise email the next morning. Not personal, professional. He requested a consultation regarding internal governance upgrades for his firm. Josephine accepted. Their first working session took place in his office, overlooking a modest skyline view. No oversized artwork, no self-promotional displays, just structured files and clean desks. He introduced her to his leadership team openly. This is Josephine Powers, he said. Her experience will strengthen our review protocols. No hesitation in using her full name. No avoidance. They worked through risk matrices and approval hierarchies for hours. Rowan invited challenge. If this structure fails under pressure, tell me, he said directly. She did. He adjusted. Their collaboration felt steady. During a break, he asked one personal question. Do you enjoy rebuilding systems? Yes, she replied. Because systems don't lie. He nodded. People sometimes do. The honesty in that statement lingered. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond governance. They discussed leadership fatigue, decision isolation, the cost of public expectation. Rowan did not rush emotional intimacy. He created space for trust to grow through consistency. Josephine noticed how different that felt. No persuasion, no urgency, just alignment. The contrast became clear slowly. Dorian thrived on admiration. Rowan valued stability. Dorian prioritized perception. Rowan prioritized process. When Josephine voiced concern about a compliance gap in Rowan's expansion plan, he did not defend himself. He listened. You're right, he said. We adjust before proceeding. The simplicity of that response startled her. There was no ego attached to correction. One evening after a long strategy session, Rowan walked her to her car. You carry experience with discipline, he said. That's rare. She looked at him carefully. Experience isn't always chosen, she replied. He met her gaze steadily. Growth is. The statement felt grounded. Safe. Weeks passed. Their working relationship evolved naturally into shared dinners and long conversations. There was no dramatic confession, no urgent declarations, just mutual respect deepening quietly. Josephine recognized something she had never truly experienced before: emotional safety. With Rowan, she did not feel required to protect his image. She did not feel asked to carry his burden. She felt invited to stand beside him, and for a woman who once confused sacrifice with devotion, that distinction changed everything. The announcement came on a quiet Thursday morning. Federal regulators filed formal charges citing executive-level authorization irregularities tied to offshore capital movements during Halcrest Biotech's rapid expansion phase. This time, the name at the center of the filing was not Josephine's. It was Dorian Halcrest. The language in the indictment was technical but clear: accelerated approvals, incomplete board disclosures, material misrepresentation of executive oversight. Financial networks interrupted regular programming to cover the development. Stock values dipped sharply within hours. Board members released statements acknowledging cooperation with authorities. An interim leadership committee was formed pending investigation outcomes. Dorian appeared briefly outside corporate headquarters, declining detailed comment. His face, once defined by controlled confidence, now carried visible strain. There were no carefully staged tears this time. No narrative framing him as blindsided. Documentation connected his authorization directly to the transactions under review. Analysts revisited past interviews, replaying statements he had made about transparency reforms. The contrast was undeniable. Josephine read the official filing alone in her office. She did not feel vindication. She felt confirmation. The structure she had studied in prison was now publicly recognized. 5 years earlier, she stood alone in a courtroom. Now the chain of accountability extended upward. Truth had not rushed. It had advanced methodically. And the image Dorian spent years rebuilding was beginning to fracture. He called her that evening. The number appeared on her phone without warning. Josephine considered letting it go to voicemail. She answered. "Josephine," he began, voice tight. "This is being exaggerated." She remained silent. "They're interpreting authorization timing without context," he continued. "Expansion pressures were extreme. You understand that?" She understood many things. "What do you need from me?" she asked calmly. A pause. "I need you to clarify publicly that we made decisions together, that I trusted your guidance." The request landed with precision. He wanted shared responsibility again. This time, not to protect the company, to protect himself. "You already had my clarification," she replied evenly. 5 years ago. That was different," he insisted. "You accepted isolated responsibility." "Yes," she said. "I did." Silence followed. His breathing was audible through the line. "They're building a case around perception," he added. "If you speak, it changes tone." Josephine recognized the pattern instantly. Appeal to partnership, appeal to shared history, appeal to narrative. Her response remained steady. "My silence protected you once," she said. "I won't distort truth again." His voice shifted. "You owe me some balance." The statement revealed more than he intended. She did not react emotionally. Balance had never existed. Josephine stood by the window while he spoke, city lights reflecting against the glass. "Dorian," she said, "I carried responsibility that exceeded my role. I won't repeat that." "You're acting detached," he replied sharply. "We built everything together." "We built structure," she corrected. "You made final calls." The distinction was simple. He tried another angle. "If I go down, the company suffers. Employees suffer." The argument echoed the night in the penthouse years earlier. "Save us." She recognized the script. "You have legal counsel," she said. "Follow their advice." His frustration surfaced. "So that's it? You're walking away while I face this alone?" She absorbed the irony quietly. "I faced it alone," she answered. No raised voice, no accusation, just fact. Her tone did not carry bitterness. It carried finality. "You asked me once to protect your image," she continued. "I believed that was love. I was wrong." The line hung in the air. She felt no anger while speaking it, only clarity. "I won't participate in rewriting truth," she concluded. He did not respond immediately. For the first time in their shared history, persuasion failed, and Josephine did not feel guilt. She felt alignment. The call ended without resolution. No shouting, no dramatic declarations, just silence. Josephine set her phone down gently and returned to her desk. Rowan entered the office minutes later, noticing her stillness. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yes," she replied honestly. And she meant it. Later that week, Dorian stepped down from his executive position pending formal proceedings. Media commentary shifted tone. Words like alleged misconduct replaced earlier praise. Celeste issued a brief statement confirming she had concluded her advisory role months prior. The empire Dorian fought so fiercely to preserve now stood under examination. Josephine watched coverage without emotion. She had already processed the collapse internally years before. Closure does not require spectacle. It requires understanding. She understood now that love cannot survive where accountability is absent. She understood that silence used to protect someone else can become self-erasure. And she understood that walking away calmly carries more strength than standing in anger. Dorian's fall did not define her. Her response to it did. No screaming, no retaliation, just detachment. And in that detachment, Josephine found something she had never fully possessed before: freedom. Recognition returned to Josephine's life, but it arrived differently than before. No glossy magazine covers, no staged photographs beside ambitious expansion charts. Instead, academic institutions and governance boards invited her to speak on corporate accountability reform. Legal associations referenced her case study when discussing executive authorization structure. This time, her name stood alone. Not as a cautionary headline. As a reference point for reform, she contributed to white papers outlining stronger compliance frameworks for rapidly scaling companies. Her insights were practical: layered approval safeguards, independent audit triggers, separation between executive vision and financial authorization. Organizations began implementing policies influenced by her recommendations. She noticed something meaningful in these invitations. Leaders did not approach her out of curiosity about scandal. They approached her for clarity. Her credibility did not come from perfection. It came from consequence. At one national ethics summit, she received an award for advancing governance awareness. When she stepped onto the stage, applause filled the room. She did not speak about betrayal. She spoke about responsibility. Integrity costs comfort in the short term, she said. But without it, comfort never lasts. The audience stood. Josephine understood then that reputation rebuilt through truth stands stronger than reputation maintained through illusion. Josephine expanded her consulting work into structured training programs. She partnered with legal experts to design executive compliance courses tailored for startup founders and board members. The curriculum emphasized documentation discipline, shared accountability, and transparent decision pathways. Each training module addressed a core vulnerability: unchecked authority, ambiguous approvals, emotional loyalty interfering with governance. She required participants to role-play high-pressure scenarios. In one exercise, executives were asked to decide whether to approve a risky capital movement without full board review. Then she asked a single follow-up question: who carries the consequence if this fails? The room always grew quiet. Her programs were adopted by venture capital firms as mandatory orientation for funded startups. Insurance providers recommended her framework to reduce liability exposure. The irony was not lost on her. The very systems that once failed to protect her were now strengthened through her design. But she did not dwell on irony. She focused on prevention. Every company that implemented layered safeguards represented one fewer scenario where loyalty could distort judgment. Her work became less about personal redemption and more about collective responsibility, and that shift freed her from the past completely. Beyond boardrooms and policy sessions, Josephine began mentoring young executives. Many were women navigating leadership in competitive industries. Some sought advice about balancing ambition with personal relationships. Others feared appearing difficult when raising compliance concerns. Josephine spoke candidly. "Clarity is not aggression," she would say. "If someone resents your boundaries, that reveals more about them than you." She encouraged her mentees to separate love from liability. to demand documentation, to never sign anything without full visibility. In private conversations, she shared the lesson that took her 5 years to learn. Sacrifice without mutual accountability is not devotion, it is imbalance. Her mentorship extended beyond finance. She taught emotional literacy and leadership. She explained how ego can distort ethical judgment. She urged transparency in both contracts and relationships. Young professionals left her sessions not only with policy checklists, but with strengthened self-respect. Josephine saw pieces of her younger self in many of them. Ambitious, loyal, ready to prove commitment. Now she offered what she once lacked: perspective, guidance rooted in lived experience, and through mentorship, she transformed personal pain into collective protection. While her professional life expanded, her personal life deepened quietly. Rowan remained steady. There were no dramatic declarations, no urgent timelines. They built trust through routine, weekly dinners without phones at the table, honest discussions about business pressures, clear conversations about expectations. When disagreements arose, they addressed them directly. No persuasion tactics, no emotional leverage. If Josephine expressed discomfort with a business decision he considered, Rowan paused and reviewed it. "If it compromises our values, we adjust," he would say. That consistency mattered. She did not feel required to protect his reputation. She did not feel responsible for absorbing his risk. He invited partnership. He did not demand sacrifice. One evening, after a governance workshop she led, Rowan told her quietly, "You rebuilt yourself without bitterness. That's strength." She met his eyes. "Strength without safety feels heavy," she replied. "With me," he said, "you don't carry alone." The simplicity of that promise held more weight than any vow she once heard at a wedding reception. This relationship was not built on ambition. It was built on transparency, and transparency allowed intimacy to feel secure rather than strategic. Years after her release, Josephine stood in her office, overlooking a city skyline. The same kind of skyline that once framed penthouse conversations filled with persuasion. This time, the view represented something different: choice. She had learned that emotional safety is not automatic. It is constructed deliberately, through honesty, through shared accountability, through refusal to carry what is not yours. She no longer confused silence with loyalty. She no longer equated sacrifice with love. Dorian built an empire on image. It collapsed under examination. Josephine built her future on integrity. It strengthened under scrutiny. Her life now held balance: professional respect, healthy partnership, inner peace. And that peace did not require public applause. It required alignment. Let me ask you something. Would you protect someone who would not protect you? Think about that carefully. Because loyalty without boundaries can cost more than comfort. If this story moved you, subscribe for more stories about love, power, and dignity. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not winning together. It is walking away whole.